So today let's discuss pushing boundaries. Now, one thing that is really important to understand is that pushing boundaries is a natural, healthy, normal, and developmentally appropriate thing that your child needs to do. Your child, your small child, is born into this world with absolutely no idea where any of the boundaries are. They have no idea that running into a busy road is something that they shouldn't be doing. They have no idea that hitting their friend in the face is socially unacceptable. And they have no idea that throwing a massive tantrum in the middle of the mall is going to embarrass you. They have no idea. So your young child's job when they are born is to constantly push boundaries, because by pushing boundaries and getting resistance to those boundaries, we help them create a sense of the world around them, and we help them to understand how is it that they should be behaving in this world. Okay, so this is important. Your child needs to push the boundaries. If they're pushing the boundaries, then at least you can be confident in knowing that they're developmentally doing exactly what it is that they need to do. And if we think about this for a moment, we actually did this ourselves when we first met our partner. Let's say you and your husband, for instance, you start dating, and what I would do is I would push my husband's boundaries. He gives me resistance, and if I push it often enough, I start realizing, okay, every time I do this behavior, it upsets my husband, or my husband reacts in a certain way. And after pushing it often enough, I realize I need to behave within his boundary line. And vice versa. He pushes my boundaries, I hold the boundary, and eventually he stops pushing it because he realizes that upsets me. And this kind of dynamic is something that our children need to do. They really need to do. In fact, your child needs to push social boundaries, mommy's boundaries, daddy's boundaries, the teacher's boundaries, the school structure boundaries. They need to push all of those boundaries in order for them to understand how is it that they need to behave in front of these people or in all of these situations. So what I want you to understand is I don't want you to be afraid of your child pushing boundaries. I want you to understand that the fact that they're doing that is normal. Now, moms get worried or concerned for a few reasons when their child pushes boundaries. Firstly, I find parents think that by holding a boundary, we are somehow punishing our child. Now, holding a boundary and punishments are two completely different things. Holding a boundary is saying, this is the line I don't want you to cross. Punishment is saying to a child, if you ever cross a line, there will be harsh consequences as a result of that. Okay, so the two are not the same. You can hold the boundary in a very kind, loving, and socially acceptable way. You do not have to be angry and stern and firm and almost cruel to your child in order for them to understand that a boundary is being held. You can hold a boundary in a very loving way. Next up, I find that parents often get triggered when our children hold boundaries, because often when they're pushing boundaries, they're doing so in front of other people. And the last thing a mom wants is for other people to think that our children are socially non-disciplined. Okay, we don't want people to think that we're not raising our kids correctly. So when our child misbehaves or pushes a boundary in public, it embarrasses us. It really does. And then that's kind of where we don't know kind of what should we be doing? What are people thinking? So your child pushing a boundary is going to trigger you, but you need to understand that what your child is doing is normal and not to become reactive towards your child because they're doing something that is developmentally normal. So let me give you an example of this. So I have a 2.5-year-old who's now reaching that I want to be independent with regards to everything stage. So when we go to a mall, she no longer wants to sit in a trolley and she no longer wants me to carry her. Now she wants to walk. So my rule is that's fine, you can walk, but when you walk, you hold my hand, and that's for her safety. We're walking through a parking lot. So she can walk next to me if she holds my hand. Now, every now and then we'll go there and she hits my hand away and she just starts running. Okay, I run after her, then I drop down and I look her in the eyes and I say, Ella, if you want to walk, then you need to hold mommy's hand. If you don't hold mommy's hand, mommy's going to pick you up. Okay, then I stand up again and I hold her hand. I've just established a boundary. If she flicks my hand again away and runs off again, I'll go back to her and I'll give her one more chance. Ella, mommy is serious. If you're walking in the mall, you need to hold mommy's hand. Otherwise, mommy's going to pick you up. And if she does it a third time, I pick her up and she's probably going to have a full-on meltdown, but this is my boundary. You're welcome to walk through the mall, but you need to hold my hand. Now, a punishment would be spanking her or giving a smack on the bum because she ran away from me. Young children don't know how to connect those two. Their brain isn't developed enough to understand that a hiding is associated with the fact that I was running. That level of understanding really only occurs when the child is much older. So a small child only understands their own physiology. So what you need to do is be very visual. Pick her up, put her down, put her in the trolley. Okay, you need to speak to her body. Okay, in a way that understands. We call this a natural consequence. The natural consequence of not holding my hand is mommy picks me up. And I can pick her up without being angry. Okay, so that's important to kind of discern the difference between a boundary and a punishment. It's also then important to understand that a child is going to push the same boundary multiple times before they understand that that is a boundary. So my daughter is going to smack my hand away and run away from me in a shopping center 5, 6, 7, maybe even 8 times. And I have to hold the boundary every single time before she's actually going to internalize that that is the boundary that I've got in place. Now, another important thing to understand is that we will never hold a boundary on our child's emotions. The fact that you feel an emotion in any given moment, you have zero control over that. You have no control over your emotions. What you do have control over is how you react to your emotions or how you behave as a result of your emotions. So when it comes to setting a boundary, we will always hold a boundary on their behavior, but we will never hold a boundary on their emotions because they don't have control over that. So it's kind of unfair. I like to use the example of, let's say you are in your kitchen and you have your baby in your arms and they're crying, and you're trying to put formula in a bottle to make them a bottle. And your 3-year-old is standing next to you going, Mommy, I want juice. Mommy, I want juice. Mommy, I want juice. And your husband comes freshly showered out of the room and he's like, oh, you haven't started dinner yet. And in that moment, you just freak out. You just flip your lid. Can everybody just stop? Okay, you lose control. The fact that you got overwhelmed and you lost control in that moment, you had no control over that. You don't. You felt overwhelmed and you erupted. If you go and hit your child, or you throw something on the ground, or you storm off, now there you have control over your behavior. Now imagine in that scenario that I just explained, your husband took one look at you and he said, we are sick and tired of you. We're tired of you taking your negative emotions out on the family. You just disappear. We don't want to see you for the next 30 minutes. How would you feel in that moment? Because that's a punishment. You'd feel terrible. You'd feel misunderstood, invalidated, and really you'd feel awful. And often that's what we do with our children. They have an emotional eruption, but what we want to do is we want to go and punish them because of that. Now imagine that same scenario and your husband took one look at this and he's just like, oh man, okay, I can see you're really overwhelmed at the moment. I've got an idea. Let me finish up here with the kids and why don't you go sit outside and take a breathe and I'll bring you a cup of coffee. Ooh, immediately he would help you to regulate your emotions back down just by being understood. And as a parent, this is what you want to do. You want to hold the boundary on their behavior, but you want to validate and accommodate their big emotions because really at the end of the day, they have no control over that. And then finally, I want to mention small children under the age of 5, their only goal is to make you happy. Honestly, that is all your little child wants to do. So if your child ever behaves in a way that makes you think that they're misbehaving or they're doing something that is inappropriate, usually it's for one of 4 reasons. Okay. Firstly, there is no boundary. So the child behaves however they want because they don't yet know where the boundary line even is. Secondly, the boundary keeps on changing. One day I jump on the couch and mommy laughs at me, but then tomorrow I jump on the couch and she gets upset with me. Now I'm confused, so I don't know how to behave. The third one is that they have an unmet need. You can have the best rules regarding meal times, but if your child has a need to connect with you, they're going to misbehave at that meal time in order to see if they can get your attention. Okay, so an unmet need. And then finally, they're underskilled. If your child hasn't yet got the capacity or the ability, or they're developmentally able to manage some of these emotions, they are going to behave in a socially unacceptable way. Why? Because they are underskilled. So it's important to understand these 4 things. We want to hold boundaries. We want to establish boundaries, but we want to do so in a kind and loving way. And when we do establish a boundary, we need to ask ourselves, is this boundary I'm asking my child to abide by something that they can developmentally do? It is reasonable for me to expect my 3-year-old to use the potty before we climb in the car and we go to the shops. But it is unreasonable for me to expect my 1.5-year-old to bath and never spill water out of the bath. That is unreasonable. The way that they bath kind of encourages water spillage, okay? So it's in order to say, is this boundary that I'm placing, is it reasonable? Is it developmentally appropriate? And how am I establishing this boundary? Am I doing it in a cruel, harsh, and unhealthy way? Or am I being firm and consistent, and I'm doing so in a loving way? I hope that this was helpful.